Yes, education was a huge part of when I was growing up. My dad died when I was 5, and my mom was left to herself to kind of raise 4 children.
Mm.
And she placed a huge emphasis on education. She finished her bachelor's degree after my dad died. She got her master's degree. She got her PhD. And so that really created the sense that education is important.
Mm.
And having kind of a background in central Kentucky, that was also the key to education. Get out. I had an uncle. You got to go to college. You got to go to college. So teaching education was truly a part of what's happening.
So you hear those stories a lot about kids, they grow up with a dad who's a pastor and they run far from the Lord. But in your case, it seems like your mom was such a great lady. She didn't push you away from what career she was pursuing. She actually moved you to want to be a part of that. Is that correct?
Right. Part of the reason for that is because her experience was such a good experience.
Mm.
She was in a school for a number of years. And then when she left the school, she went into Cedarville University. And so it just seemed like education created opportunities. And a teacher was one of those things that created opportunities. And she was just such a positive understanding of teaching and the importance of it.
Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciated was, she would tell stories about a 5th grader that she had. And then she would talk about, well, I just saw him as a junior and he's a wonderful kid. He's really turned out great.
Mm.
I hope I had something to do with that. And so, planting seeds and being a part of someone's life, that was ingrained in me from the very beginning.
So not only is she setting this awesome example, but she's speaking into these young people. You're seeing her speak into their lives and then telling you about the progress. So you can actually see the real difference that a teacher makes.
Right. And that's one of the things that as a teacher you have to keep in mind, because in the present, no one's saying, wow, that was a great lesson today. Thank you so much. You're wonderful. And I love having you in class.
Yeah.
You have to keep in mind that you're planting for the future and for that student's future. And that's what I love about being in high school too, because alumni usually come back and visit the high school. And so when they come back, they say, I remember this, I remember that, and I really appreciate what you did, kind of a thing. And it's nice to hear, but also it creates an understanding of importance for what you're doing.
Is that something that is difficult to kind of teach newer teachers, to kind of look down the road when the kids might not be listening, they might be causing trouble, and they don't see that value yet?
Right. That's like, for example, we give a quiz to a student and we see an immediate result, pass, fail kind of thing. But as far as influence and change, you don't see that immediately. And that creates a frustration because you're like, I poured in, but that kid seems to have a hole in his bucket and I can never fill it. But that's okay, because the next step or the next person will influence them as well. And it eventually gets to where it needs to be.
You've probably seen, I know you have a couple kids, you've probably seen that in parenting too as well.
Right.
Where that same thing relates, you work and you try and instill values into your kids. And it might not click right away, but I'm sure as you've seen your kids grow up, become adults, move on with families, you see that as well.
Right. I have a son my oldest son, and when he got married, he married his wife and she had a 6-year-old or 5-year-old. And I remember him calling my wife and saying, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for when I did what I did, because now I'm reaping that with this, and then he'll call and he'll say, thank you, Mom. Thank you so much for being patient, for loving me, for caring for me, because he sees how that does make a difference in his own child's life.
And not only that, but it's difficult to be a parent. And I'm sure it's difficult to be a teacher as well, to be patient and stay focused. And man, I have 6 sons, and I honestly can't imagine trying to run a classroom all day with 20, 30 kids. It's got to be challenging.
Right. My wife teaches kindergarten, and she has between 15 and 18 in her class.
Okay.
One every year it might be. And she's the one that really reminds me of how much energy and how much time it takes to get involved. But the wonderful thing for her, too, is because I'm in the high school, I often have kids that are from her kindergarten class. Like, for example, there was one young lady, she's playing volleyball, she's a senior, and she walks up to me and she goes, do you recognize this picture? And it was her and my wife in the kindergarten together. And I said, you've got to send that to my wife. And, of course, it just made my wife's heart overwhelmed with gratitude for what this young lady has turned out to be.
That is so awesome. Let's go back to your mom. She sounds like an amazing woman. And you mentioned that your dad passed away when you were 5.
Right.
Tell me more about that.
I was the last of 4. And when I was first born, my dad was kind of having some health issues. And they didn't really diagnose it correctly, and they thought he may have had tuberculosis or maybe something like that. Well, it turned out that he had colon cancer, and so they didn't catch it soon enough, and so over the time it just became worse. And by the time I was 5, he had died, and my mom was left with 4 kids, and we're talking 4 kids within a range of about, my sister was 10, and so I'm 5, and so then you've got 4 kids. And one of the first things she did was she says, I need help. And so her grandmother raised her when she was a little girl because she had a really difficult home life. And her grandmother raised her. And so she went to her grandmother and said, hey, will you move in with me?
Yeah.
And so my great-grandmother was the mom staying at home. And then my mom went to work every day. But incredibly, she was never a victim. You know what I mean? She never said, poor me, too bad for me. I remember she shared a story with me. The doctor told her, your husband's not going to make it. This is terminal cancer. And she just was shattered, and she just wept in the doctor's office. And the doctor handed her a Kleenex and said, that's the last time you can do that because your kids need you. Wow. And she chose that route. She chose that route to be the strength, to be the one in charge. I always joke with my sisters about how tough my mom was. Like if you were to see her, you'd say, she's small, she's slight, but she was just so strong because she chose to do what was beneficial for her kids. And she was a great example.
I want to keep talking about your mom, of course, but tell me a little bit. You lost your dad at 5, and I'm sure that's something that a lot of people have experienced. Do you think that's played a role at all in your desire to teach and to have these roles in leadership and to pastor?
My sisters tell me that was probably the best thing that happened for me, because what happened then was, I kind of had to grow up, and I had to kind of always listen to someone say, well, you're the man of the house now. You're the man of the house now. And so I never felt overwhelmed by that or pressured by that. I just felt kind of a responsibility. Yeah. And even though I'm this little guy in the house, I still felt like I need to be there for my family, for my sisters, and for my mom, for my grandmother. And they were so great. I mean, you start with a loving home. Yeah. It's amazing what can happen, and that's what I had. I really had a great experience growing up. I would do growing up over again. And I have no, like some people say, I would never go back to high school. I'd never do college. Yeah. I can't think of a time growing up that I'm thinking, oh, I wish I didn't have to do that. It was just such a great experience because of the love that I felt from all of them.
Yeah, that's a clear testament to who your mom was. And it sounds like your grandma, even your other siblings, because not everyone has that, Sounds like you just had an amazing foundation despite all the different challenges that your family faced.
Right. I oftentimes relate to Timothy. Timothy says, I have my grandmother and my mother, Lois and Eunice. And I can truly relate to that. And then you throw in my 3 sisters who absolutely were the mother hens to me and, wanting to make sure that I was okay. Again, it creates that environment. But to my mom's credit, she never looked anywhere else saying somebody owes me something or somebody, I deserve this or anything like that. Instead, her attitude was, okay, everyone needs to go to church. We all need to be a part of this. Our pastor was a strong pulpit guy, but he was also just a great pastor. Yeah. He cared for everyone. And so she creates that environment. And then she creates this attitude of, you're going to work hard. You're going to earn everything that you get. Yeah. We aren't looking for handouts. My dad was a truck driver, and he spent much of his early years taking under the table payments because of just driving. He loved to drive, and he didn't want to get into the union and all that. Yeah. By the time he didn't have enough paid into it to make it like, oh, wow, you're going to cash out. And so she had that to kind of deal with. There was no life insurance. There was none of that. But she never went looking somewhere else. Instead, she tried to figure it out herself. Like,
Yeah.
for example, when my sister went to college, how's she going to pay for college? Well, she started teaching piano lessons. And I can remember the piano in our house, someone being on that chair from about 4:30 till about 9 o'clock, 4 nights a week. And just, that's how she paid for college and things. But she never let us suffer. Like, for example, I said to her, the only time you never saw me play basketball was in the Philippines. And she just didn't go with me because I went 2 years in college. I went during the summers to the Philippines.
Yeah.
But every single basketball game she went to, and the one high school game she didn't, the state patrol stopped her car and said, "Ma'am, you cannot go any farther. There's too much snow and ice. You need to turn your car around."
She sounds like Supermom. So I'm just curious to throw another question in there. Some people go through these types of circumstances and they become a victim. They crumble, they become depressed. What do you think it was that separated your mom, other than perhaps her character? What do you think it was that just helped her to be so focused, positive, strong in that really difficult time?
My mom left her home when she was 16. She got married to my dad. And then when she was 17, she has a child. So she was early trying to get out of the house. And my great-grandmother was the one that always was there for her, always supporting her. My mom's dad and mom had some alcohol issues, some family issues. And so my mom wanted out. And so early on, she kind of created this fortitude.
Yeah.
I'm going to be strong kind of an attitude. And, we can talk about birth order. She's the firstborn. So, she feels like, yes, I've got to do these. But the other thing that happened was the kind of transformation that comes in your heart as a result of knowing Christ. As she grew older and she found places to be, the church was always something that she wanted to be a part of. And then finally we arrived in this place called Northfield, Ohio, and that church truly became our home. I was there from the time I was 2 years old till I graduated from high school.
Wow.
And then when I graduated from high school, she and I both went to Cedarville University. So her faith meant everything to her.
Yeah.
I can remember Isaiah 26:3 was one of her favorite verses. I will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. And so her commitment to trusting in what the Lord has and the plan that he has creates that peace to allow you to do other things that you want to do.
I want to just go back for a second. And you said that church kind of became your home. And I think so many people are missing out on what that means. We go to these churches that might be enormous and no one really even knows whether you're there or not.
Right.
And then there are some other churches where maybe people just don't feel comfortable because there's 5, 10, 15 people there.
Right.
People can come up with all kinds of different reasons why they don't want to be there. Even Christians that have gone to church for 30 years and then all of a sudden they stop going for one reason or another. What I've found personally is that it took me a while to find the right church where I felt like I fit in, where I felt like I could really share my gifts with the body. Tell me about that. What do you mean by you felt like it became your home? Because I want to encourage other people to find that as well.
Right. When we went to church in the old days, it was, of course, Sunday school, morning worship service, Wednesday night prayer meeting, and you had a Sunday night service. So that created a community in and of itself just because you were there more often.
Yeah.
The other thing that created the community is there were a bunch of hillbillies there, which I include myself in.
Sure.
The pastor used to joke about Easter. He called it West Virginia Passover because no one was there. They would all go home.
Okay.
And so Easter was not a big deal to us, in our church. So that's usually the biggest service for people.
Yeah.
But for us, it wasn't because people went home to Kentucky, to West Virginia. So there was that kind of community.
Yeah.
Personnel, how we were raised culturally kind of thing, and brought into the church. Plus the pastor of the church, his name was Lynn Rogers, strong character, just a strong man, and he pastored. I mean, the joke was his fingerprints were everywhere. And so there was this sense of, okay, he showed up to watch me play basketball in high school.
Wow.
He showed up to watch, someone else in their band concert. But he could do that because it was a community church. It was Northfield, Ohio, and Northfield people were coming to that church. So that created, again, that sense of, okay, we're all in this together kind of feel. But the other thing that I think that sometimes I forget about is the importance of the Word of God being a part of all of that. Like whether it was Sunday school, morning worship, Wednesday night, whatever it was, the Word of God was the thread that held all that together. And I think, whenever you hold up a light, that brings things together. And the light of the Word brought people together because that's what he made most important to his ministry. And then he would show that out by how he lived and how he interacted with the people in the church.
It sounds like you were just very blessed to be in the company of these different people, this terrific pastor, terrific mom, terrific grandmother. So we've been talking about your mom and your pastor, but your grandma also really pushed you, right? And there's this one really great story. Share that with the listeners.
Her son would take her camping occasionally, and I got to go one time. I'm 9 or 10 years old, and I even have the picture of me sitting on her lap at the campsite. And one of the things that was the boat. Everybody wanted to be on the boat to be able to go fishing, and so she wanted me to experience that as well. Yeah. Well, you know how adults, they get busy, so she said, teach him how to do it. Get him in the boat, get him by himself. So my uncle did that, and I found myself going out in the boat, getting to go fishing and do things like that. And on one occasion, I'm out in the boat, and the signal of a red jacket or a red life jacket was to come in.
Yeah.
It's time to eat.
So they would like wave a red jacket and say, time to come back, buddy.
And so I'm out in the boat, and I'm looking at that. I'm thinking, I haven't been out here very long.
Yeah.
Kind of like to stay. Well, then it became a little bit more intense, waving the jacket. And so I decided, okay, fine, I'll go in. I put my poles down. I began to row in, and I'm going nowhere.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, have I forgotten how to do this? And of course, my uncle's becoming a little more anxious and all that. And I realized I just hadn't pulled up the anchor.
Yeah.
So I pull up the anchor and put it in the boat and then come back. But the thing about that was, even though I was young and little, I still had the sense of my uncle's going to save me. My grandmother could come get me. Someone's going to get me out of this. Even though I stubbornly held out for a while, when I finally relented to what they wanted and pulled up the anchor and came in, everything went out fine.
It's really a great metaphor for life too, isn't it? Where we're in the boat of life and we are rowing. We're doing what we think we need to do, but we're not going anywhere because we have these different anchors that are still at the bottom.
Right. And the anchor was intentional in the sense that, yes, in this moment, that's what's important.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden it lost its importance because I had to go in. And until I got it back into the boat and on my way, I wasn't going anywhere.
I love hearing those stories. Thanks for sharing that with us, Drew. And share about your book. It's called A Herculean Task, Teachers Making a Difference.
The Herculean part is the tasks that Hercules had to do to kind of repent or to bring back change from having done some heinous acts. And those 10 tasks are what I kind of talk about. I outline what the task was and then how that fits into a teacher's life, keeping your life clean, like being persevering, different things like that. And so the chapters are all connected to those tasks that Hercules had to do. And then I try to paint a picture of my mom as my Hercules. She's the one that was truly a Hercules in my life with teaching and things like that. And so it's a book mainly about teaching, but also, there's some leadership things that I think people can pick up on as well.
What I was thinking when you shared the book with me is that not only could teachers benefit from it, but as Christians, we're called to make disciples. And part of making disciples is teaching, right? And I would imagine Christians could benefit from that as well, not just teachers.
Right. The motivation behind the book was to get what my mom knows down on paper.
Yeah. Because
it had helped me, so I thought it could help someone else. And her efforts or her energy was geared to exactly what you're talking about. It's not just about a teacher in a classroom. It's about everyone in life teaching someone else. And it could be in all different ways. And even if you just take one thing that Hercules had to accomplish and make it your task, it will create an opportunity to teach whomever in whatever level of life.
So let's talk about that a little further. I want to know from you, you've been in teaching for decades. You come from a family of teachers. You wrote a book about teaching. Parents are teaching their kids, teachers are teaching their students, Christians are teaching those they disciple. Tell us what makes a good teacher.
There's a great story in Malcolm Gladwell's The Outliers where he tries to talk about teachers, and he compares them to college quarterbacks. And college quarterbacks, in college, they're just sensational. They're just amazing. Well, then how do you figure out how to transfer that into the pros? Well, it doesn't always work.
Okay.
And his example was Chase Daniels. Chase Daniels was a great college quarterback at Missouri, and it just didn't translate into the classroom. And he says there's something about them that they don't have, that to get them to teaching. And his point was, you're kind of born to do it. Now, I get that and I understand that, but you can also learn to be a teacher. You can also learn those things. And part of what makes teachers best are the ones that are present. I know this is probably a cliche, but
Totally get it.
90% of life is showing up. And so teachers that are present in their classroom, that's a huge start, because then they have the attention of the kids because they want to be there and the kids will pick up on that and want to be there. And then of course there's the rapport that you establish. I have a son, my oldest son, and he got a new art teacher halfway through 7th grade.
Okay.
And he had a terrible time the whole second semester. And finally he and I sat down and I said, son, what's the problem? And he says, Dad, she keeps calling me Jason. And he says, I don't know why she's calling me Jason. My name's Josh. And, something so simple left that connection out with that teacher and my son. And as a result, he did not have a good experience, and we forget, and especially as high school teachers, because high school teachers, we love our subject.
Yeah.
We love history or we love math. Well, we forget that we also have to love the kid because he may not love math. He may not love history.
Absolutely.
And so loving the kid, and again, I don't want to sound cliche, but they want to know that you care before they care about what you know. And so if they know that you're vested in this and that you're a part of this, then they'll want to know what it is that you're having to share with them.
So you just said something that really hit me. A lot of it is about showing up. And I really just want to sit on that for a second and think, what does it mean to show up also as a student? Not just as a student in the classroom, but also as a student of the Lord.
I love the story of Mary and Martha. Remember, Martha is working so diligently to get everything prepared, and Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to what Jesus had to say. A part of Mary is, yes, that's what we want.
Yeah.
Of course, we want Martha's as well, but Mary chose what was best, and that's being at the feet of Jesus, listening to him. So Jesus had that ability to make people listen to him. We're engaged, we're locked down, and Jesus, they're listening to him. So taking that into the classroom and trying to get students to listen to you. Well, what made Jesus someone that people wanted to listen to? Well, he loved them. He was there. He was present. All of those things Jesus was. And as a result, people listened to him. And so in the classroom, that's what we strive for. We strive to create a rapport that says, I'm here every day, and I'm here for you, and I'm glad to be able to teach you history. But don't forget, I'm here for you. Yeah. And so whatever else that looks like, we try to maintain and create rapport with them. And Jesus was the best at that.
So what you're saying for the teachers out there is make sure that you're looking at the full circle, right? Not just your subject, which you're passionate about, not just about the lessons or getting the grades done, but really looking at the student. And I think that's so true as well in parenting as well. I know we have a lot of different crises going on right now with mental health and all types of things. We recently had some school shootings this week. Tell me, what are teachers, what are parents missing when it comes to connecting on that next level?
Sometimes one of the things with COVID, and I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail, but one of the things that happened was, of course, this emphasis on, well, we just got to do this. We just got to get through this, that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Well, what happened then was kids stopped coming to school regularly. Absenteeism is at an all-time high everywhere. And then also teacher absenteeism is a problem. So again, to the point of just being present and being available. One of the things, a hot button right now is phones. What do you do with phones? Well, In our school, we have decided that when you come to class, you're going to put them in a pocket in one of those cow packs or whatever they call them.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with that. But I also, like, for example, you and I are sitting here talking. You're not on your phone. I'm not on my phone.
Yep.
Because we're engaged with each other.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes what happens is, as parents, as teachers, as whomever, we forget that we need to engage with this person in order to keep them from being distracted or being off onto something else. And so I'm not saying it's only the teacher's responsibility, but I think phones would be minimal in terms of their influence if teachers were more engaging and taking more seriously. Hey, listen, this is my responsibility, and it's something I want to do, and I get to do. And same thing with my parents. You know, if my son, I have two of them, and they're just like everyone else. You know, they have phones, but when we're together, I may say, hey, look at this on your phone, or hey, you know, check this out on your phone. But I don't want that to be a fallback for them. I don't want them, because they're visiting me, all of a sudden they're like, I better get my phone out. Dad's boring me to death. You know? I want to engage in that conversation.
How do we create that in the family home? Like our family, we do devotions every day. I know a lot of people have gotten away from sitting at a table, having dinner together. And what I hear you saying is people are almost using the phone or technology as a substitute for relationship. So how do we bring that back into the family?
I credit my wife. I can't think of, I've been married for 100 years, and I can't think of too many meals where we sat in front of the TV. I mean, she was very guarded of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's sit down as a family. And, well, my sons all were in something. So I had a son that was all sports. I had a son that was all fine arts. So we didn't eat at 5 o'clock. You know, we would eat at 6:30 or whatever time. But she still said, okay, let's get together. And I think that's part of what you're trying to understand is, hey, you need to be intentional in terms of saying, this is what we're going to do as a family. And the other thing, and this is my problem, you know, I'm a preacher, I'm a teacher, clocks mean nothing to me. But sometimes we think that with our family, well, we need to make this for the next 10 hours. It doesn't. And, you know, I think there's this need for quality over the quantity.
Yes.
You know, making sure that when we are together, it's a meaningful thing. You know, it's something that they have connected with. And, you know, attention spans are shrinking, and we have to be sensitive to that. And so all of a sudden, an hour, 2 hours, that might be plenty.
Yeah.
You know, instead of trying, okay, we got to get through till 10 o'clock. We don't. We have to get through till it's enough.
Yeah. I think that is so important. And we've watched our sons go from, you know, just little guys up to being in their 20s. You have as well become grown and get their own families. And I think we're just forgetting that no matter how old you are, you can have tons of stuff weighing you down in life, tons of stuff going on. And if we don't make that time regularly to connect, to talk, to make ourselves available to listen, we're really missing out on connecting with our kids, but also some really big issues that they can get into.
Yeah.
I bet you've seen that in the school.
Right. One of the things, and the Lord did this, my sons are 12 years apart. So I almost had it better than most people because I had one at a time kind of thing. And then when they did come together, they become brothers, and it's a really neat thing to see. But I think what happens is, again, we want this movement, or we want something grand, instead of understanding, hey, you know what? It's okay that all you did was say hello this morning and give your kid a hug.
Yeah.
That's okay, because that's all they maybe could handle at that point. Because, you know, I can't imagine having 6, you know, and trying to manage that. Because attention, your wife's attention, mom, dad's, we forget attention is something they crave. And even if it's just in a small portion, it still needs to be a part of what happens every day.
That's so true. I was on the internet, of all things, the other day, and I heard someone say something really interesting. They said, small children can't tell you how they feel, but they'll come up and say, do you want to play? Do you want to go do this? And I think that's so true, that whether your child is 5 or whether they're 10 or 20, that you don't miss those signals for invitation.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. They have their own way of signaling what it is that they want or need. Like, for example, I have a son, and for whatever reason, when they get a certain age, they get off your insurance, they get off, and so they have to start figuring those things out. And all of a sudden, I'm talking to my son about insurance and different things like that, and I'm like, I never imagined this. I didn't even think I needed to tell you about this, but here we are talking about it. And at the end of it, I said to him, you're doing a great job being an adult. And I just said it. I wasn't thinking, attaboy, that kind of, I was just thinking, this is great that you've thought of this. And he stopped me and he goes, I really needed to hear that. I didn't even think that. And here's this insurance conversation that becomes, you're being a great adult. And it's something he needed to hear.
Let's just expand on that a little bit. Man, the words of a father or a father figure or a mother, they are priceless. Like, just telling your child something like that, even if they're an adult, it can just impact them in such a great way. And I want to encourage our listeners to not withhold their words of encouragement, of affirmation. Tell me, as a teacher, as a dad, as a pastor, not only why we need to hear that, but how we can do that more for the people that we love and even strangers.
Right. Let me go negative first.
Sure.
When COVID happened, I could have become a millionaire if I had $1 for everyone that said to me, you got this, you can handle this, you can do this. Emails, posts on Twitter, whatever. And I think what happened was that became like, well, I better do it. And I better say that. And they need to hear that.
Yeah.
Instead of, you know what? I love you, and I'm so glad to be a part of your life. Yes. And so I want to genuinely say to you, here's an example for my son. My son is a chef in Indianapolis. He cooks at a restaurant called Milktooth, and he has started his own side hustle called The Open Fire.
Okay.
And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an open fire, and he cooks meat and all this kind of stuff. And they had ribs and greens, mac and cheese, and something else. I can't remember. Oh, it's spice cake. But anyway, I got the order of greens. I'm eating the greens, and all I could think of was my mother. She loved greens, and I thought in my head, my mom would love these. Yeah. Well, my son called my mother Momo, so he comes by and he goes, Dad, how is it? And I said, Momo would love these greens. Yeah. He almost broke down crying.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to make him cry. I was just trying to help him to know these were great greens. Yeah. But because of my mother and because of that connection, and I'm not trying to say I'm genuine, but it was just in the moment that, and I think sometimes we forget that. We forget that, go ahead and express it. Yeah. If that's what you're sensing or feeling, just say it. You don't have to have a list that says, good morning, class. I'm so glad you're here. Check, check, Yeah. You need to really be glad they're there. Yeah. For whatever reason that day, you're thrilled for them to be there. Yeah. And in our relationship with the Lord, that's a constant. He thrills by our presence. He loves for us to be around. And sometimes we forget that, and so we neglect that. Instead of knowing, it doesn't matter. What does James say? He says, he doesn't upbraid us. That's the old King James. He never scolds us. You can go to him constantly and ask for wisdom, ask for whatever. And he's not going to say, what are you doing here again? Haven't I done this already for you? Yeah. And so we forget that. And so that whole attitude of you're accepted by the teacher, by your parent, by the Lord, that creates all kinds of relational opportunities.
Have you heard this study? It's a study about praising kids, I think it was, and some were praised for their academic ability, what they accomplished, versus some were praised for just their effort. People who were praised for their effort actually did way better in the future because it didn't tie it to, you have to get these good grades.
When I first started teaching, one of the things my mom, because I would share with her classroom experience, I would say, and that kid's so smart and things like that. And she's saying, okay, you may think he is, but what is it that he's really doing? Is it because he's working so hard? Okay. Is that what you should be targeting? So I understand exactly what you're talking about. Because there is that sense of, okay, you're smart. Well, are you, or are you just working hard at this? And sometimes we forget that. we forget to comment on, and you're working hard. I had an uncle, and he taught a class, and he refused to fail anyone if they showed up every single day.
Wow.
So they could do nothing, but if they showed up for every single class, he would at least give them a D. Because he says if they're making that effort, they shouldn't fail. You know, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You know, I appreciate the fact that effort is rewarded. Now, of course, we have to accomplish something in the end, but still, the effort does need to be praised.
Yeah. I think that's just an important lesson for parents too, because if we praise the outcome, if we praise you got an award, or if we praise you won the spelling bee, well, what happens when they don't win the spelling bee? What happens when they don't make the team, right? But if we're praising the effort, if you're really giving it your best effort, I think that's going to go a long ways with kids. Because if they don't make it, then they at least know they're putting in the effort that they're supposed to be.
Right, and then there's something else that they can move on to.
Yeah.
Because everybody can put out effort. You know, not everybody can be a doctor, but everyone can put out effort to learn to become somebody better in themselves and things.
So, Drew, you have a unique perspective. You've been a teacher for a long time, a pastor. You have a perspective that a lot of people aren't aware of. Tell me, in your role and if leadership and administration in school, what are our kids facing right now? What's the biggest thing that parents need to know about that we can help the teacher at home?
Yeah. I joke with one of our board members. I call our parents a double-edged sword, you know, because on one way, they cut the path so that we can proceed more carefully. But on the other hand, they cut back at us, kind of limiting what we can do.
Yeah.
And so I think parental support is huge, you know, encouraging teachers, however you want to do that. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I would come home with a note from the teacher saying, Drew's talking too much or whatever. My mom would sign it, I'd just take it back. You know, you send an email and it becomes an invitation to war, you know, instead of, you know, and so we have to remember we're allies.
Yeah.
We're allies with parents. We need each other, you know, and that's very important. The other thing that sometimes happens with parents is they forget that each child is different. I was sitting in a parent-teacher conference, and well, I'll just use the name Bill. Bill was the student that was in the class at present. And both the mom and dad started getting on me. They're like, well, Bill doesn't do this. Bill doesn't do that. And Bill needs to be more like Chuck. Well, Chuck was the older brother. And Chuck was this, Chuck was that. And I thought, well, there's the problem, you know. That when you're comparing and saying, okay, Bill has to be like Chuck. So I compliment parents when their children are different. You know, I say to them, that's great, because what you've done is you've allowed them to be who they are. Now that doesn't mean I'm talking, you know, personalities and things. I'm not talking morality and all that. But each child is different, and sometimes parents forget that. I think that helps. But the students, even a student said to me the other day, but your stuff was never on the internet. You know, because something had happened to this student in 7th grade, and now the student is in high school, and someone brings back a picture or a snapshot on a text or something like that, and you know, it's a different universe. It's so pervasive. It's just everywhere. And so the pressure from peer pressure, those kinds of things, is different. I don't know if it's greater than, but it's so different. And the students are constantly feeling a scrutiny. And so I think sometimes as parents, instead of scrutinizing, sometimes we just need to hug them. We just need to love them and to remind them, hey, this is a safe place for you. This is a great place for you. And the better you feel at home, hopefully the better you'll perform at school.
And to not, like you said, to not put them in a box, you know, to be just like this sibling or that sibling or this neighbor kid, because everyone is different. And what I've found with our kids is that they excel at different things. And that is exactly what God wants us to do. He didn't make us all the same. Like, for example, with you, you said your teacher was sending notes home saying you're talking a lot in class. Well, your mom could have said, stop talking so much in class and be like this sibling. She wasn't aware you're going to grow up to be a public speaker, you know? writing books and speaking into the lives of hundreds of people. So it's just an example of put the brakes on, right? Slow down a little bit. Don't judge too quickly, and allow people to kind of grow to be the way the Lord has made them.
Right. And that's one of the things for being in a Christian school that really helps us, I think, is to have your perspective. The Lord has created. The Lord has fearfully and wonderfully made this child. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know? And then, of course, you think about Hebrews, run your race. In Hebrews 12, run your race.
Yeah.
Don't run your sibling's race, or don't run my race.
Yeah.
Because I have sat across from dads who have said, I know exactly what he's going through. I know exactly what he's like. I was exactly the same way. Well, there might be some similarities, but in reality, you're 30 years beyond where this guy is now, or behind where this guy is.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's a forgotten part of, okay, sure, you're both males, you're both from the same house, but there are so many different circumstances in 21st century education that we've never dealt with.
Man, I just think that's so important to recognize that. And also that is just such a reason to build each day into your kids. Let them know that you're listening. Let them know that you're present and you're there. And to build that relationship. Not every kid wants to tell mom or dad what's going on in their life all the time.
Right.
But to show that presence. Because our kids are going to encounter difficult things. Sometimes things pop up and you're like, wow, I had no idea, but I'm here for you. Right. So I just encourage parents that are listening, really go after building that relationship. Don't force it, right? But make yourself available and do things together. Like you said, that quality time, not just the quantity.
Yeah. I had a parent, the student had gotten into some trouble. The parent came in and said, that's not possible because I know everything about my child.
You don't.
And, it wasn't that student's word against mine.
Yeah.
It was that student's word against 15 other kids that we witnessed this. And so for the parent, that was a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
But again, to your point, you don't know everything, but you better be there when you find out and support whatever it is that you need to.
And the other thing that is just coming to mind that I don't think many parents are doing, I know I fail too, but praying for our kids. Just praying for them each and every day. We have a picture of all the boys, and sometimes I'll go over there and I'll just look at their pictures and pray for each of them. What
so great.
How do you see that playing into the lives of hungry kids grow up, praying for them?
Well, and that's one of those forgotten things, not just when it comes to children, but just it's a forgotten art, or it's a forgotten thing, because we want so much instant. We want so much, I've encountered several people, and I'll say to them, well, how's your relationship with the Lord? And they'll say, well, used to, but then I prayed and he said no. Then I asked him for this, it was no. And then I see what's happening in the world, and God said no. And it's like, if all you ever did was ask, if all you ever did, like for my wife in that relationship, if all I ever did was ask my wife for stuff and she says no to me, does that mean she doesn't exist or that she's not important? Instead, we forget there's a relationship with God. And out of the relationship comes the prayer. And so when, like for example, with children, I'm not the greatest father in the world, sure, but I'm a part of the greatest father in the world. And he can cover things that I can't cover. And so that's why prayer becomes so important. Lord, help me to be wise. Help me to be understanding. Help me to be able to let go, because he's going to college and, different things like that. He's living in Indianapolis. I can't see what he's doing every day. So Lord, please prompt his heart. Please encourage him with your presence. That creates an understanding of I'm with the greatest father.
Yep.
And he can take some of the things that I can't do.
And it's not because our kids are weak. It's not because our kids are bad.
No.
It's because we were born on a battlefield. And we have real enemies who are out to destroy, kill, steal, and destroy. Right. And praying for our kids, praying for our family, praying for our neighbors. That's something that we should just be doing every day.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's one of those things that you don't even have to spend a lot of time doing. It can be every day. You pass a picture, and all you have to do is say, Lord, just remember them. Lord, help me to remember them. Lord, help me to trust you different things like that to create that connection.
Absolutely. You know, Drew, in the news recently, there were 2 different school shootings this week. 25 years ago, April 20th, 1999, I actually lived at Bible school up in Estes Park, Colorado. And we got a call that we were to get all the college kids together and go down to Littleton, Colorado, because someone shot up the school. They killed 13 people. So we got into some vans, made some hot chocolate, went down and ministered to all the people who were coming to the high school and just mourning. Share with us some of your experience on what is going on and how we can help.
Yep. It's such a puzzling thing because there are so many different types of shootings that happen, or there are different individuals that are behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes we are trying to pigeonhole it, and that's probably not the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But even farther deeper than that, of course, is the individuals, the troubled lives that students have. Mental health is a real deal. I mean, it's a real thing. So whatever we can do, especially at home, to create the environment, to love our kids, so that when they're going to school, it might be rough and it might be hard. But again, they can come home and find that safe place to recover and to go back. Not a place where it gets inflamed and it's like, we need to. Instead, it's I go home, I rest, I recover, I can go back to school. And sometimes we forget that with kids. They need that opportunity to gather themselves after a tough day of school. And it just doesn't always happen.
And I think we forget so many times that something as small as teasing someone for how they look, teasing someone for what they're wearing or what they don't have, can have a profound effect, especially in a school setting over time. And that's not an excuse, obviously, to shoot someone or carry something out with violence. But Jesus encourages us to love, just love in ways that are boundless. And I would just encourage all the young people out there, not out of fear, but out of following Jesus, to love everyone, to encourage everyone. We all need that, don't we?
Right. It's in Ephesians chapter 5 where it says that we're to imitate God, that literally mimic God as beloved children. We're loved of God, so we want to look like him. And then we're to walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us. And the result is going to be a fragrant, acceptable sacrifice to God. And I can't help but think of my wife and I. We went to this place called the Candle Lab. It's in Open Rhine. And you go and you have this wall of candles, and you smell the candles, and then you pick out the different scents. And you make your own candle. So anyway, so we left that, and my wife's looking at me, and she goes, "You smell really good." And that's what happens when you're around sweet scents, when you're around pleasant scents. And so people that are loving God create this wonderful fragrance that attracts and is more appealing and creates just a better place.
I think we're all called to do that just in our daily lives. The other day, I was driving into my neighborhood and I saw this gentleman. I don't know him. He didn't live in our neighborhood, but he had his mower out. And I just stopped my car and I said, "Hey, do you need help with your mower?" And we kind of talked about that a little bit. And it sounded like it was the battery. So I said, "Do you want me to just go grab my battery and come back?" And so I went and grabbed the battery. It came back. And we just started having this long conversation about where we live and what's going on and the development. And as I was leaving, he said, "You're the first person," this gentleman lived there for like 50 years. He said, "You're the first person who's ever come up here and talked to me."
Wow.
And I was flabbergasted. I could not believe that this gentleman lived there for almost 50 years. And he was telling me that I'm like the first person who ever stopped to talk to him. And that's just an example there that there are so many people hurting. People are going through all kinds of different things. And sometimes all it takes is just a quick 5-10 minute conversation to show someone the love of Jesus.
Right. When I first got into ministry, a pastor said to me, he said, "Preach to the brokenhearted. You'll never lack for an audience." And sometimes we forget that, because people are able to create a veneer that says, "I'm fine, I'm fine." But if we just do something as simple as stopping and saying, how's it going? It really does make a difference.
Yeah. And that difference then spreads, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, it's like contagious.
It is.
Then he may talk to someone or have a better day and impact his family.
Yeah. I just enjoyed so much just being a part of the kingdom. You know, I don't know how else to say that, you know, because you've already kind of categorized things as a father, as a preacher, as a teacher, administrator. You know, I just enjoyed those parts of my life. And one common thread through all of it, and even in my marriage, is the idea of calling. You know, I think this is what God has called me to do.
Yeah.
And it gives you such a confidence to be able to do what you need to do because this is what you are called to do.
Yeah.
So if he's going to call me to do something, he's going to equip me, or he's going to be there with me to help me get through it.
A lot of people are wondering, God, when are you going to heal me? When are you going to provide the money? And the thing that came to mind is the Red Sea wasn't parted until it needed to be parted. The healing for some people didn't come until it needed to come. And I just feel that to be so true in life, even though it can be very difficult. And you've been in a pastor role and probably had lots of people come to you wondering, why isn't this happening? Why isn't God doing this? I would just encourage them, when it's time, God will make it available. When it's time for that money, God will give the money. When it's time for the healing, God will give the healing. Have you found that to be true?
One of the things when I first got into ministry was we had a prayer list on Wednesday nights. And I was the one doing the typing. So I was, of course, well aware of what was on the prayer list every week.
Yeah.
And I started noticing there were some that were on there every single week. Well, I was new, so I really had no context to some of the requests.
Yeah.
Then I found out that those are requests that have been being prayed for weeks, months, years even. So God had a wonderful deacon in my church. His name is Sam Self. And I said to him, I said, Sam, do you think we ought to put these requests on every week? I said, don't people start to think, well, God's not doing anything? And he goes, no. He said, it's a reminder that God's going to do something. And he said, so we're going to keep putting those on there. He said, don't take them off, because it's a reminder that God's going to do something.
Yeah.
And he's exactly right. The reason why I pray is because God's going to do something. I don't know when that's going to be, but he's going to do something. Here's an example. My wife was in college, and she was in a science class, and a kid shows up, and the kid's like, just kind of a mess. And so my wife says, are you okay? What's going on? And the kid says, well, my mom's having a baby today. And here's this kid, he's 20 years old, and his mom's having a baby. You can imagine the harassment he's gotten and things. And so now, and my wife said, well, let's just pray about it. And so they did.
Yeah.
And so the baby's born and everything, and everything was great. Turns out great. So then my wife and I get married, and we have our own kid. Well, what do? We pray and ask the Lord to bring someone into his life that will help him be what God wants him to be.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I, we pray that, and we're praying for our son. My son grows up, has a wonderful time in high school, goes on even in Chicago to be in Second City for a while. Then he comes back, and he's cooking in Indianapolis. And as he's cooking in Indianapolis, they have an open kitchen, and this young lady sits down at the counter, starts to engage in a conversation. And they strike up this conversation. All of a sudden, they find out their backgrounds are so similar. They both went to Christian school. They both have parents that were in ministry and different things like that. Well, they end up getting married. That young lady was the baby that was born to that guy that was in the chemistry class that my wife prayed for.
No kidding.
So the answer to the prayer comes 35 years later.
That's amazing.
So we're praying because God will answer.
Yeah.
And we don't know when, but he's going to, just like you said.
His story is beautifully intertwined, isn't it?
It is.
I had Dr. Michael Young on recently, and he had this great story where he was an atheist. He became a Christian, and then he was moved to write this book, Reconsidering Ayn Rand. So he wrote this book, and unbeknownst to him, he goes years and years later to this church in another state. And he meets the pastor, and the pastors, they realize they went to school together. And the pastor says, you know, back then I didn't really know you, but I could tell that you needed prayer, so I've been praying for you. years and years ago in school. And that was really awesome for Michael to hear, just how this person he didn't even know was praying for him before he became a Christian. But the interesting thing is, Michael went to write this book and finds out that the book that he wrote, being moved by this man to become a Christian years later, is now impacting the life of his brother in ways to move him towards Christianity. So God, there's nothing that can hold God back.
Right.
Our stories are thoroughly intertwined. And what a reason to continue to pray for people.
It is. That's great.
Well, our guest today on the Narrow Road Home is Drew Baker and his book, A Herculean Task. Drew, thanks so much for coming in today. It was great to have you on, to share all of that history from being a pastor, being a teacher, having a great mom and a grandma building into you, a great pastor building into you. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience as we close?
Well, I just appreciate this opportunity. You know, the Lord's been faithful to me with family, with my wife, my sons, my upbringing. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to share that.
It was great to have you on the program. I can't wait to see you again. Maybe we could do something fun this fall.
All right. Thank you.